Hello, Adobe Max. Welcome to Delivering Video for All Screen Formats. I'm Jeff Greenberg. We're going to talk about horizontal. We're going to talk about vertical. If you need to reach me after this, you can do so at max2020@jgreenbergconsulting. You can always type into the chat pod. And let's talk about what we're going to do today. We got two big goals. We're going to talk about getting video out smarter and dealing with vertical and horizontal formats. We're also going to see a couple of switches in Adobe Media Encoder just to make it a little bit smoother. And for us to do so, I want to just right out of the gate show you a trick. In Adobe Media Encoder, there's a switch, and it's off by default, that says don't encode if missing items are detected. If you're in Premiere and for whatever reason you unmounted a drive, you've got something that's not connected, this switch prevents you from accidentally outputting with the words media offline in the project. So this is something I have on. I encourage you to put it on just with the understanding that stuff won't go out of Media Encoder, won't go out of Premiere if this switch is on and you have a clip that's offline. Okay, hope that was useful. Let's talk about the key concepts for today. We're going to talk about how the different platforms handle ratios, vertical and horizontal, and that the beautiful thing here is Adobe has a switch, has a feature called Auto Reframe that can just fix most of the work for you. And I'm going to show you some smart ways to work when it's not perfect. And then I want to talk a little bit about Adobe Media Encoder and just how to get the best quality out of it with the knowledge that every platform you go online, they're going to recompress your work. YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, they're all going to recompress no matter what. So what does it mean to deliver to all formats? Well, what it means is this. It's a question of where, how are we putting it out? And I want to ask you a creative question here. Which is the right camera? Is it Sony? Is it Canon? Is it Nikon? Is it Arri? Is it Red? Which is the right operating system? Is it Mac? Is it PC? Of course, the answer is Linux. How do you hold your camera? And this sometimes almost gets into fights between people. I'll watch my wife sometimes and she'll record video vertically and I cringe because I hate vertical video. But realistically, none of those first three questions matter. It's all about storytelling and your audience. And you see, if I'm connecting to an audience that's holding a phone vertically, I want to shoot vertically. A little bit here, though, of history, just a little foundation. We like this wide cinematic sort of video because that's the way our eyes work. They're horizontal, like this. Now, even with that emotional argument from me, I have to still, nevertheless, point out, it's still about the story. Vertical has a lot of advantage based on content. You know, if I'm somebody who's framing things vertically, I want my video to be vertical. Even YouTube on mobile, if you shoot vertical and you turn vertical, it fills the display. Certain platforms have different requirements. We're going to examine that in a second. But I'd also like to introduce to you, if you're not familiar with it, Square Video. Square is an excellent choice if you're somebody who really crafts the frame, because no matter how your audience turns their mobile device, the frame is identical. I want to give you this real quick. I want to get us over to Adobe's Auto Reframe, and I'm going to do that in Premiere Rush. I just want you to see, if you were a Premiere user, great. If you've never opened Rush, it's a really quick editor. I do a lot of quick craft on my phone or on an iPad as I'm out and about, just a quick sketch together. And I want to show you, before we get into the interface of Rush, I want you to see the three things we're going to look out for. We're going to look out for a switch in Rush in the corner. That's for the aspect ratio. Now that little switch will let us change to, like, say, square. We're going to look for the switch for the actual effects, and in the effects is the switch for Auto Reframe. Let's go ahead and let's actually demo this. So there's Adobe Rush. Here's a product of some materials that were part of the original training for Rush. And right here in the corner is that switch I mentioned. I'm going to click on that switch and I can say vertical, 4x5, which we'll talk about in a second, or we're going to do square. When I do this, it did an okay job, but it didn't really get that positioning right. So I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to turn on effects. I'm going to turn on Auto Reframe for this one shot. Now, it takes a moment. You can see this little purple bar here saying it's doing its analysis. And when it's done its analysis, it's going to reframe that based on Adobe's artificial intelligence technology. I think it's Adobe Sensei. I can never really pronounce that right. Hey, and it's done. I'm happy with that. I'm going to do that for all the shots here. So I'm going to select all. I'm going to go up here and just choose Auto Reframe, and you can see the reframing occurring on all the shots. If I'm unhappy with the frame of any individual shot, I can just click this and choose, oh, no, I wanted the focus to be there instead. And it's gone and it's made adjustments to every shot here. Some of them are perfect, some of them need some work. But the whole concept here, from a practical point of view, is you didn't have to do the bulk of this work. Adobe did the heavy lifting for you. That's what makes it really exciting to me. I'm a pixels sort of guy. I can spill off the numbers like anybody's business, but this is more about talking about ratios. And it's because, we're changing what the visible available frame is, just so we can have the correct discussion around it. The common ratios we run into are 16:9, which is wide, vertical, which is 9:16, and a square, which is 1:1. You also may end up seeing a couple other ones here, like 1.9:1 or 4:5, which are hybrid horizontals and hybrid verticals. And they're kind of close to square, but not identical. Who does what? Here's a list of it. Don't sweat this slide. The end of the deck, I've got another set of resources, a bunch of places where you can go and you can look up your specific platform. So you can see, for example, here, though, Instagram Stories does vertical. They also do 4:5, and 4:5 is that 600 by 750. That's the maximum that they recommend. So we've done this now in Adobe Rush. I want to show you how this works in Premiere Pro. This is what Auto Reframe is all about. Fix it for me, Adobe, please. You have a sequence loaded. You go to the sequence menu and you choose Auto Reframe Sequence. And it's going to do a bunch of things, and we're going to examine how that works. So, switching over to Premiere. Before I do much with this is a whole bunch of work with my kids. And I've chosen this footage because that's where I've got most of my vertical video is stuff I've shot of my 3 kids. So you'll see I've got the vertical clips here all in a teal selection. And I've got my horizontal clips all purple. And I've mixed them right here on a timeline that happens to be horizontal. And this way it's real easy for you to see some of the issues I'm going to run into. All right. We go up to the sequence menu. We choose Auto Reframe Sequence. Please note, I've mapped it to the F5 key because I've been doing a bunch of it recently. And it says, okay, I'll create a sequence for you. What format do you want? I'm going to choose square. I'm going to need glasses for this. What kind of motion tracking? Most of this stuff moves pretty slow, so I'll use the default. And we'll talk about the nesting in a second, create. Now, it's going to automatically load up that sequence. And as it loads up that sequence, I'd like you to see that it's auto reframing the clips all down here in the bottom. I'm going to park on this clip. This is Abigail. For Abigail here, I'm going to select this and I'm going to say, bring up the effect controls. And there you can see the auto reframe. I'm going to turn it off. Oh, it's a 4K clip. I'm going to turn it back on. It scaled it and repositioned it fairly intelligently for me. And I'd like you to see that when you use auto reframe, it disables the motion tool. The motion effect built into any clip is an intrinsic effect. That first choice, and I want to show you this back on screen here a second. when we go ahead and we take a sequence and we say Auto Reframe, we get the choice to nest or not to nest the clips. So if you've done a lot of scaling and moving around the shots, you want to nest the clips. You're going to go ahead, push them a level deep, preserving all of their reframing, all of their adjustments you've made, such as a push in on a photo. And then you'll have to reapply transitions. But if you've done very little or nothing at all, and you have a lot of transitions and a lot of timing crafted, you want to say, no, I want to not nest my clips. So the question here becomes whether you nest or not to nest. I'm generally not nesting. The clips that I have to deal with, I'm going to flag the ones I've animated. I'm going to flag and make sure I handle them directly. So we get from here into the question of refinement. What happens when it doesn't work great? Or when it doesn't work the way we want? And here on this, let's take this clip here. My girls, there they are, Sophie and Abby, and I've got that selected. I want to make some adjustments. I'd like you to see there are two sets of adjustments here that have got a stopwatch and two that don't. The ones that don't are global adjustments. I'm scaling or offsetting the entire effect. That's a little bit better. It's X and Y. I clicked and scrubbed. I clicked and held and dragged in there. I'm happier with that. But I realize I'm not happy with the keyframes, so I'm going to overwrite the generated path. And it's generating keyframes, so you can see the position showing you exactly what's been keyframed. This is that idea that I'm adjusting the position and I can further keyframe it. And there are about 3 or 4 really useful tricks I'd like to show you about how to work smarter with this. So once you've generated the path, and by the way, these tricks will work with any sort of effects in Premiere. The first one I want to show you here is selection follows playhead. You'll notice that if I move to a different clip, this is still selected, which means it's what's loaded in the effect controls. One of the neat things when you go to the color workspace is that it automatically turns on a feature here under the sequence menu called selection follows playhead. And once this is on, every time I move my playhead, it gets loaded automatically for me. That's going to prevent me from accidentally working on the wrong clip. I'm a huge fan of keyboard shortcuts that make sense to you. I'm sadly not going to frame why Shift 5 happens to be very sensible for effect controls, but I'd like you to know Shift 5 gets to the effect panel. Shift 1, by the way, gets you to the project. Shift 3 gets you to the timeline. There we go. We're shifting to that window. So I'll hit Shift 1. Did you see my project become active? Shift 3, my timeline. Shift 5, my effect controls. I'm going to encourage you to go into your keyboard presets and give yourself 2 keys that are not mapped by default on the keyboard. Those are F2 and F3. F2 go to previous keyframe. F3 go to next keyframe. Those are exactly what they are in After Effects. And once I'm up in here, you can see I can jump from keyframe to keyframe. I'm not pressing these little arrows here because I decide that, say, these 3 keyframes aren't any good. I've lassoed them. I'm going to hit the delete key and I'm going to go ahead and reframe them. Let's pull them a little bit to the left, the girls, and you'll see it automatically added its own keyframe. And that was that last sort of tip that, oh, I didn't do full screen. Let's do that. If I really need to go in and clean up all these keyframes, I'm going to hit the tilde, the accent grave key, and I can lasso and remove these with a lot more control. This is really great, especially if you have 2 screens, because you could have the second screen have the full screen of your actual animation. Couple other neat tricks with Auto Reframe. You can do it on a single clip. You don't have to use this just for, I'm working vertical and I need to reframe this clip. You could just throw any clip in here and have it do its magic. So I'm going to close up this sequence. I'm going to look at this one shot that I need to reframe this. So this is a 16:9 sequence. I'm going to hit the Z key. I'm just going to lasso. So I'm zoomed in right on this one clip. I'm going to hit V back for my pointer. I've got this clip, and I'm going to go to my actual effects, Shift 7, by the way, and I've typed in reframe here, and there's the auto reframe. So here I am, widescreen, vertical clip. I'm going to grab auto reframe, drag, drop. It's doing its analysis, and it's zoomed right in on Gabriel. That's the reason I wasn't at Max last year, was for his birth. And I decided it's really nice, but I'm going to adjust it up just a little bit. Those controls there are X and Y. Whoops, there we go. X and Y, I want the offset. There you go. And I'm going to set that up, and there we see him just a little bit better. All right. So you can, in a timeline, add these manually. You could always delete them and add them if you wanted to, even if you use the full effect for the sequence. The one caveat I'm going to tell you about all of your reframe work is about text. There are a lot of ways to create gorgeous looking text for the Adobe tools. I can build it in Photoshop. I could build it in the legacy titler. And if you've been using Premiere for years, stop using the legacy titler. Use the essential graphics panel. I can do it in After Effects, but what we want to use is the EGP, the essential graphics, or a Premiere-based Mogart. And the reason we do is that we get a level of what's called parenting or grouping. So when I take this timeline, Shift 1, and there are the girls, and there's a lower third, I'm going to run into a problem when I use this auto reframe feature. And the problem I'm going to run into is it's going to do a great job for the reframe, but you'll see the text here, it's actually distorted the way the lower third looks. This is what I wanted. This is what it did. Now, why did it work on the second one? Because before I did all my work, when I was working with my text here, I went over to the graphics panel, and you can see with this given element, the background and the text, I told the background not to pay attention to the video frame on the second one. I know I'm working on the first. I want to instead have this be pinned to the actual text itself. So I'm going to say, I'd like you to pin it to that. Now that you're pinned to it, I'd like you to keep the left and bottom sides. Now, if you've done this right, when you grab the text layer and you move a text layer or a graphic or anything else you load into the essential graphics, they kind of move as if they're grouped, even though you can grab the separate element and move it separately. There we go. That's kind of a neat look right there. So the idea here is I've parented this, and they call this responsive design. I've pinned my other elements to my text. So as reframe reframes my text, all the other elements move well with it. Now, just a bonus here, if you've not looked into Adobe Stock, it's part of the Essential Graphics panel, and there are a ton of pieces that are free content. If you just type in the word titles, you can type in lower third, you can type in opening. You'll see there's a ton of items in there that are free. I highly encourage you to explore it. But I want you to look for things that are optimized for Premiere Pro or work with Premiere Rush and have responsive design. Any of those tools, when you bring them in, when you bring in a Mogart, it should show up here as layers. So if I go ahead and I browse and I type in into Adobe Stock, lower third, I get a whole bunch of them in there. Let's stick to the free ones. And when I select this, there's a little icon here, an eye, and that will tell me about this specific item, whether it's responsive, whether or not it's Premiere built. If it doesn't say it, it's probably done in After Effects, but it's free. Bring it in, see how it works. Switching topics, let's talk about Adobe Media Encoder and video compression. Let's talk about two things I want you to know. I do a lot of thinking about compression. I think teaching something like compression is really hard, and that's what makes it fun to teach. Anybody can teach editing. Compression is harder to teach. I've got these sort of rules about the way you think about compression. And I've gone a little too far with how I think about the rules, but I want to talk about two specific concepts, architectures and bitrate. And I want to make sure, for those of you who feel a little intimidated by this stuff, that you don't confuse the architecture, that'd be .mov, with the codec, that would be H.264. And I think of it like this. I think of it as a glass or a bucket. MOV, MXF, MP4, those are the buckets, those are the glasses, and the liquid is the codec, H.264, ProRes, DNX. And for example, you can have H.264 live in a bunch of different types of buckets or glasses. I put out, realistically, two items, a long-term master and a distribution codec, a distribution format with nearly every gig I've ever worked on. And it's only going to be these four codecs. There's a lot of other practical uses, and you absolutely can reach out to me. But for a master, I'm looking about ProRes or DNX. For a distribution to say go up to YouTube, I'm looking up at H.264. And these are all types of compression, the kind of the difference between PNG and JPEG. But they're all described with a bitrate. And the bitrate is the actual compression. How tweaked is it? How destroyed, how damaged is it? And when we go and we do all this work, understand all your online platforms recompress every single piece of video you ever give them. So given that bitrate is everything, my distribution formats, H.264, HEVC, I will give them a larger file. So the only reason not to do it is upload speed. Let's talk about the actual mastering codecs. I'd like you to see, I've given you just a simplified 4 versions like proxy. Look, when you finish your work, if you're working on a higher end camera, you probably want to put it out at either ProRes HQ or DNX HR HQX. If you're working with GoPros and 8-bit cameras, ProRes 422 standard quality output. And I am simplifying this. This is one of those files. The whole reason is this will last long and can be recompressed in the future without any damage. But what I give to YouTube and Facebook and everybody is an H.264 or H.265 file. And the difference here is that knob. I can turn it to any value I like. And this is where we get into something really cool. When we go to Media Encoder, so I'm going to do that right now. Here I've got something set for output. I'm on a given format. That's the container or glass, H.264. We'll make it H.265. Here are a bunch of presets. Actually, I want to go back to H.264 because I want that Twitter preset. Notice it's not vertical. We would have to make that choice from our sequence. But I want to look here at where it says hardware encoding and bitrate. So those two items are really crucial. Why are they crucial? Well, if your computer doesn't have hardware encoding, we're now at a spot where you should consider buying a new system or buying a better video card, because it's video card driven. Mostly. It's a little bit of CPU driven as well. But if you're not getting this as a choice, when you choose YouTube or Twitter presets, this is your time to make that change. And the reason it's so important is I'd rather see it get out of your system way faster, especially with H.265 with HVAC. You should be aware that if you know any of the craft of compression, there are different sort of encoding types. All of the online sites are going to be VBR, variable bit rate. We're not going to talk about it today. We're going to do 1 pass. 2 pass, there is no hardware acceleration for 2 pass. So it's always 1 pass we're looking at. And then this is my tip in there. Set the bit rate larger than the platform. All the platforms are minimums. Yep, you could take that knob and push it way off. Generally speaking, I go to the platform and I double their numbers as a starting point. Adobe's done a pretty good job of that, but I like to go and push it a little bit extra as long as my upload speeds are good. If I create a really big file and I'm working off of my cell phone to upload, it could take forever. And that's one of the few balances that I occasionally compromises I'll make. But the whole idea of giving them a bigger file is you want to make sure your file is giving them the best looking, the least damaged version for them to do their further compression with. 25 minutes. So, key concepts we covered here. We talked about square and vertical platforms and how intelligent that the AI behind Auto Reframe and how much time it can really save you. You no longer have that excuse that, oh, I got to redo all my work. And then I showed you a couple ways when it's not perfect, how to refine it. And then the big thing about compression is that I wanted you to up the bit rate and the value of hardware-based encoding. Here are a bunch of resources. You can go refer to this later. These are encoding resources and grouping about what the current sizes are right now on the various social platforms. At the very end here, hi, I'm Jeff Greenberg. Thanks so much for watching. I'm a master trainer. I teach Train the Trainer classes. I can talk to you about editing, audio, color, workflow. You absolutely can have me to hire you can hire me to teach your people remotely. I've been doing it for more than 5 years, but the last 2 years really heavily with Zoom here. There's my office number. There's my email address, my mailing list. I'm Film Geek on all of your favorite social networks. Thank you so much for attending this class. I hope I see you again, and feel free to reach out. Thanks again for watching. Hope you have a great Adobe Max.